Hi everyone, welcome. I'm so excited to welcome you to our inaugural informational webinar about our inaugural hackathon. Lots of firsts, and it's super exciting to have you here. I'm going to introduce myself and then pass it over to my colleague and co-conspirator so he can introduce himself. So I'm Rose Horton. Happy to have you here. I am a nurse by training, education, and passion. I have been super privileged to work with the birthing community like my entire career. So I love the birthing community and so happy to not just work with them, but to advocate and to find great solutions to mitigate the problems that I see in the space that I work in. And I'll get into that detail in a few minutes, but I'm going to turn it over to Ty so he can introduce himself, and then we'll chat even more.
Okay, well, thank you, Rose. So hey, I'm Ty Hagler. My background, I'm not a nurse. I'm an industrial designer by training, which means like I played with like Legos and Play-Doh in school. Uh, but really, it's like kind of the theory of creativity and how you take your ideas and make them into reality. And so I've been doing some flavor of what you'd call a hackathon in terms of structured creativity, where you have teams of people coming together to generate a result. And I'm so tickled to collaborate with you, Rose, on this because I firmly believe that nurses are one of the best sources of truth and understanding of some of the biggest problems we have in healthcare today. And I'm just so tickled to be able to collaborate with you on this.
Yay, thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. So for those of you who don't know me, well, I am really passionate about mitigating maternal and infant morbidity and mortality. I coined a hashtag in 2017, and it really was at the height of my frustration with the rising rates of maternal morbidity and mortality, and the hashtag was not on my watch. And I was really thinking at that moment, what can I do? How can I be part of the solution? And I thought within my locus of control, this is what we're going to do. So Not on My Watch was birthed out of frustration, and it's become really my life's work. A couple of things that you may or may not know about our current reality as it relates to the birthing community. What we know for sure is that the rates of morbidity and mortality continues to increase, and there's a significant disparity that exists with black and brown women dying at 2 to 3 times the rate of white women, white counterparts. So that's troubling. And we also know that 84%, according to the CDC, I was at the meeting when they shared this, 84% of the mortality and morbidity is preventable. I call that the shame of the healthcare system. So that means that we can do better. So I know many of you are really inspired and you're moved by that metric, and you want to be part of the solution. So there's that. And also as a nurse, working in the space from being a clinical nurse to taking care of patients, all the way to doing education and to being in executive leadership, I know that nurses are masterful at workarounds. I remember going into a labor and delivery unit here in Atlanta where I was working most recently, and watching how nurses had these washcloths, working with a fetal monitor so that they can capture the fetal monitor. Nurses were masters of the workaround, and that really is a sign of our ingenuity, it's a sign of our creativity. So I said, as we think about this overarching issue of morbidity and mortality, I want to hold space for nurses and clinicians and community workers who are close to the problem. I want to hold space for them to say, hey, do you have a really creative idea? Have you been thinking of something and wondering, wait, why don't we do this? Why don't we approach the problem this way? So that's why we're having this inaugural hackathon, because I know us, right? I know that we want to be a part of the solution. I think about a couple of different companies like Couplet Care, the brilliant Dr. Kristen Tully, that was, her imagination. I think of VasoWatch and Stephanie Mondry and her amazing work. I think about Operation Mist, and that is Dr. Catherine Sylvester, who is here in Atlanta, and she was asking the question, hey, I wonder what would happen if we utilize wearables and we tracked some information. So many of us are doing some creative things, and I just want to be a part of it. I really, really want to be a part of it. There's a quote that we're using for this entire process that really resonates with both Ty and myself. And Glenn E. Martin was the person who said this, that people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And I know that to be true, but furthest from power and resources. And let me tell you, that's a whole word there, a whole word. So again, that's what's motivating us. We want to not only hold space, but we also want to invite those with the power and the resources into the space to help amplify the work and to really, at the end of the day, really have an impact, right? We're not just doing this for the sake of doing this. We want to have an impact on mitigating morbidity and mortality for the birthing community. And I have every confidence that you all, the collective, you all are the people to do that. So I'm going to stop talking for now and turn it over to Ty, and we're going to just share with you the vision of what we want to do. And before I turn it over to Ty, I just want to say that we were so incredibly serious about this being successful that I cannot think of a more qualified person to really help with the work than Ty Hagler. So I am deeply, deeply appreciative of his willingness to partner with me in this work and his brilliance. And after he talks, you'll see why I have all these wonderful things to say about him. So Ty, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rose. I hope I can live up to that. But
you absolutely will.
No, this doesn't exist without partnership, because the techniques and the tools that I'll share, it's really to help solve that problem of being furthest from power and resources and frameworks and structure in order to understand the problems, devise solutions, and be part of the continuity to make sure that it's a long journey to get something from concept all the way through to seeing the change, the good change you want to see in the world happen. And there's so much that it can happen along the way. I want to talk about some of the things that we can do both through this program and then also kind of the subsequent journey ahead that we can cover. But before we get into that, just kind of what I'd like to cover with this. And I see a lot of great comments in the chat. Just kind of as we're going through this, I want to cover like what a hackathon is, why we would go through and do this, my philosophy about empathy first innovation, and why I believe that really comes from working with nurses in order to drive that as a contrarian point of view about how you can conduct innovation. And then we'll talk a little bit about the discipline of empathy in context of innovation, the discipline of creativity, both individually and from a team standpoint. And then if we have time, we'll touch on some maybe value points of if you're going to try to have a commercial enterprise, what you need to do to qualify for some of those activities. So just kind of topics to cover. We don't have to cover all of this, but at the end of the day, I want to make sure we're answering questions and making sure this is valuable to the people that are here. So please jump in with questions. Rose and I will try to answer them as we go, and we can get distracted by your questions, so we don't have to cover all of the content. There will be plenty of time later if you sign up for the hackathon, because we will be doing a series of trainings in how to do some of the most important work in empathy related to innovation. So we'll have a whole webinar set up for that, and then full office hours. This is really meant to be a starting point for some of the tools and techniques we can bring to bear as you're trying to, you're doing the important work of showing up and identifying the problem and starting on this journey, and we want to honor that and match that with some of the tools we have for you. So with that, what's a hackathon? So the term from a hackathon really comes from the software industry, where that hacker culture that you have of basically hacking together different pieces of code And so these hackathons would be like a primary way that the big software companies would recruit software engineers. So the format is one where you pull together teams to go after a given problem. And then over the course of, say, a 1 to 2 day event, then the teams would then hack together a solution and then present their solution at the end. So that's the framework that came from. Now, there's a couple of different ways to do that. In a traditional hackathon, all of the work happens at the event. But we're going to shift that where the work of understanding problems in healthcare are too important. And so we're going to ask that teams spend some time prior to the hackathon to be doing the deep thinking and the deep work to really try to characterize the problem, so that when we have the dynamic and fun creative environment of the hackathon itself, that it's going to be focused and productive and also grounded in these problems that are too important to not be in service of, rather than just kind of fun and creativity and sticky notes, right? So kind of back to I think anytime we're getting together in person, that there's really 4 objectives for any event we look at. First is inspiration. And I think day 1 of the speakers you put together, Rose, is very inspiring. So definitely encourage everybody to come for both days of the event, of hearing from fintech founders and leaders and entrepreneurs and people who are changing the course of conversation from a public policy standpoint. You come to one of these events to be inspired, and I think you've done a fantastic job of bringing a lineup of speakers for that. The information side of this, there's frameworks and tools and whatnot. You're going to come away a better innovator from this. And that's where I'm trying to take the helm on that, is just make sure that some of what we have to teach can come into that. From an entertainment standpoint, I firmly believe that if you're not having fun doing innovation, you're doing it wrong. So we should be laughing and having fun as we go through and do this. And I firmly believe that there's serious play to be had during this process. And then finally, I just want to make sure that we're activated, that coming out of this, as you give your pitch presentation, that there is an action plan of, if you do decide to go forward with your idea, that there's a plan for which going through and doing that. And that's a dependency on what the nature of the output is from your team. And that's something we can talk about as we go through this process.
You know, I love this slide.
Okay.
I love all of it, but I think the entertain part with that person who's like laughing out loud, it gives me so much joy. And I remember a couple of hackathons I've been, when the teams get together, you can feel that palpable energy and that joy around them coming together and having synergy around a problem that they want to solve. So I'm so glad you highlighted that, because I don't want people to think that it's going to be dry and boring and horrible and the worst day of their lives. They will be. Y'all, you will be inspired, you will be informed, you will be entertained. And the activation, of course, is so incredibly important. Because again, we're not just doing this for the sake of doing it. We're doing it to have an impact. We're talking about saving lives. We're talking about communities actually thriving because of what we've created. So I love this time. Thank you.
Just to gut check, Rose, I mean, I gave a characterization of hackathons. You may have had a different framing for that. Do you have a different way of thinking about hackathons than I just presented?
No, I absolutely agree with, and that's been my experience as well. All of that, because it's when you're invited. I've been invited as a mentor, and I've been invited as a judge. You know, I remember my first one going in with this expectation, and then getting there, and the energy and the vibe and everything that occurred was not what I expected, which is why subsequently I said yes to other invitations. So no, I think you captured it really, really well. It is really a fun and inspirational. I remember doing a post after the last one I went to, which was at Emory University. And I remember doing a post because I didn't even realize how much I needed to be in that space that day. Sometimes the work is so heavy and it feels so overwhelming. And the energy, this was all students for that hackathon, and the energy of the students and their belief that they can change the world, it filled my cup, and I felt out of their creativity and their innovation and what they put forth in their pitch, I felt so incredibly hopeful for healthcare because of that experience. So you're absolutely correct. all these things can and will happen during the hackathon.
Just to touch on that a little bit, I think it's so important to have people from different age groups at these because, and this is actually grounded in some of the psychological understanding of crystallized versus fluid intelligence, meaning you hit peak fluid intelligence at age 24. That's your ability to respond to a novel situation and to be able to come up with a novel solution. It's like seeing a motorcycle for the first time and just figuring out how to repair the motorcycle. Versus crystallized intelligence is a career of being a mechanic on motorcycles and knowing exactly what to do. But then the difference is when you then encounter a electric motorcycle, then the crystallized intelligence needs to update and the fluid intelligence is a better strategy for that. So that's something to just be aware of. And I think that's why it's so important to have students be part of this, because that fresh energy and renewal is a key part of being able to do that. Do you want to respond to Nancy?
I did in chat.
Well, okay, so Nancy posed a question. I'll just reframe it for us.
Okay.
So if you do not have a team of 4, could you join a team of others? And will you help put teams together?
And my response was absolutely. That is definitely our job, is to look at the track that you've chosen, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. So based on the area of focus that really resonates with you, we'll assemble the team. So you'll get to meet some new folk. And then people also, because I spoke with somebody about this, if you have teams that you want to work with and all 4 of you want to join, that's super acceptable as well. So come with your team of 4, or come excited to make 3 new best friends, and we'll hook you up.
Wonderful. Great answer. So we're going to go through some of the main points that if you go to the hackathon page. But could you speak to, and you specifically called out some disciplines?
I did. And I have not been privileged to be in a hackathon that had as broadly diverse group of folk as I am envisioning. As I look at the birthing community space right now, there are a lot of amazing champions who are all in as it relates to supporting, protecting, informing the birthing community. Nurses, that goes without saying, because I am a nurse, right? I have that lens and that affinity for nurses. But also doulas. Doulas have been so amazing. I met a couple of new doulas at a retreat that I attended just a few weeks ago. And talking about the hackathon, one of the doulas came to me. She's like, "Can I please be a judge? Let me tell you why I want to be a judge." I'm like, "You can totally be a judge. That would be wonderful." So doulas are in this space and have great ideas. Lactation consultants or counselors or peer support. They're amazing. Community birth workers. A lot of community birth workers are going into people's homes. And that's a whole different experience and a whole different lens than I would have as a clinician who's working in the hospital. So I want them. I want people who are working in nonprofit sectors. I want researchers. I want scientists. I want students. This is really for everybody who loves and supports the birthing community. So everybody's welcome. But especially those of us who are close, we see it, and we have creative ideas of ways things could be better.
So then kind of part of the framework for this is then we're not just showing up, but we also have, creative mindset, the tools and techniques. There'll be something that if you've heard of design thinking before, been repackaged as empathy first innovation, but the principles are the same of how do we tap into your deeper creativity that might not be something you're aware of, but will help unlock some of your creative genius that's already there. It's intrinsic to everyone. And then also within that is, and this comes from some work we did with the UNC Department of Hematology, but we're really trying to perfect and hone a set of skills that will allow you to become better at finding novel solutions based on the unmet needs of your patients and your community. And so this is just something that will, be able to drive towards really change in the standard of care is what we're hoping to be able to do. And so, kind of getting back to Nancy's question, we'll have teams of 4 people. It's going to be collaborative and team-based, which will culminate in a pitch presentation. If that gives you stage fright, just know you've got a 1 in 4 chance of not being the person, being the person to actually have to get up on stage. You'll probably be paired with somebody who's enough of an extrovert who's willing to get up on stage and present. So we're not going to force you to do that, but it is an opportunity to make sure your ideas and voice is heard. And then also, just as a point of this is not meant to be an intellectual property grab exercise. That each of the teams that goes through and does this, if you have something that's of value, we want to make sure you're able to hold on to that value. And if it's worth patenting, if it's worth pursuing, then that is something that you as a team to go through and figure out what you do with that text. And that, as Rose mentioned, we'll be assigning mentors to your team to be able to help coach and direct as you go through this, to hopefully get to an outcome like this where you can be able to be communicating what your ideas are clearly to the rest of the judging committee.
I love that. As it relates to the intellectual property, I'm so glad that you raised that. Now, for the hackathon day, we're planning the day to start around 8:30 and end right around 4 o'clock. We're going to have a reception, and that's, of course, that's optional, but you don't want to miss it. So having said that, there's some really great things that's going to happen in the hackathon day besides the teams coming together and doing their amazing pitches and us judging and choosing a winner. We're starting the day with a CEO roundtable, and we're going to have CEOs from different sectors, from being in healthcare to being in femtech, and from being startup. So we're calling it the CEO and Influencer Roundtable, which is going to be fantastic. That's going to be quickly followed by a legislative roundtable. And we'll talk about the tracks in a minute. But legislation, policy is such an important aspect of the work that we do in the birthing community that I wanted to highlight the folks who are doing amazing work. I don't want to drop any big names because I don't have confirmation, but I want you to know there's going to be some big names. I have one confirmation that I can share. Charles Johnson, who's really well known in this space. He's an amazing advocate, or dadvocate, to use the term he used at A1 recently. He will be part of the legislative roundtable, but we have some pretty big names planned for you to be there. And at the end, we're going to end with we called it startup, but I need to massage that name a little bit. We're going to have 2 startup CEOs that are local, right, from Atlanta, that are doing amazing work. I already talked about Operation Mist, so Dr. Sylvester will be there. But also we thought for the other speakers of the startup roundtable to have a patent attorney, and to have a philanthropist or an investor there, and to have somebody who works like full-time in innovation. Because we believe that having the perspective of those key stakeholders as you think about intellectual property is really, really helpful. So know that we're gonna close the day in a very beautiful way to give you some really valid information that will help you to protect your intellectual property. So thank you for saying that. We at Not On My Watch and we at Trig, we're not trying to grab your intellectual property. We just want to amplify it and connect you with people who will protect it. Because at the end of the day, again, it'd be sick of me saying that, we want to mitigate morbidity and mortality. Mm-hmm. We want something amazing to come out of our inaugural hackathon, so that next year we'll be beating people with a stick saying, we don't have enough room for you. We're overwhelmed with applicants. That's I'm putting it out there in the atmosphere.
Wonderful. Here, I'll jump to the next one. So actually, you want to talk to the innovation tracks?
Yes, I would love to. Our team worked on this and discussed it ad nauseum to say, hey, what makes most sense? Again, we want to have an impact. So someone said, we need to talk about what's happening in pregnancy and birth. We want to focus on Atlanta, because the state of Georgia, because we live here, right? And the number one cause of mortality is centered around cardiovascular disease. So it would be great if you think about the pregnancy and birth timeline, you know, the 9 months and plus 2 to 3 days post-birth, right? What happens in that space? So cardiovascular disease, hemorrhage is still an issue, obstetric hemorrhage. Substance use disorder is definitely a growing issue, complications from that, mental health issues. So pregnancy and birth is one track. If that's your jam, if you're someone who works in that acute space, then this is for you. And then there's a fourth trimester. And I do believe Dr. Tully was the first person that I heard use that phrase. So what happens after discharge, right? After the family, we package them, put them together and say, go and be great, good luck. We know that the majority of morbidity and mortality happens between day 15, some say day 42 to day 365. So what can we put in place during that time? And telehealth has definitely bubbled to the surface. Navigation, home visiting programs. What else? You know, what great app do you have in mind that would really have an impact for the fourth trimester? Speaking of app, we wouldn't be true to ourselves if we didn't talk about technology and AI, right? AI is huge and growing, and I believe that we should be the ones as healthcare clinicians to have an impact and to talk about AI and to ensure that AI is used ethically and that it's used with a lens of equity. So what technology do you have in mind? I think that one is the easy one. And then last but not least, policy and legislation. You know, we know that Medicaid extension is available and some states have embraced expansion, not our state. But what else can we do from a legislative perspective? And when I think about the Momnibus and all the work that Lauren Underwood has done around the Momnibus and the Kira Johnson Act, which is part of one of the 14 bills within the Momnibus, you know, how do we help to really fuel bipartisan support and national adoption? Or is there another policy that you can think about? And because there's lots of them, and a lot of our policies are antiquated, and some of our policies are even harmful. So these are the four. There's going to be overlap, right? There's going to be technology that is helping with pregnancy and birth, and there's going to be legislation that is focused on the fourth trimester, and we're fine with that. But we want folk to say, you know, this is me, you know, this is where I fit in, this is where I can have the most impact, and we want folk to jump in and choose that, and then start working with your teams.
Yeah, I just want to add to the policy and legislation side of things that I've worked on innovation projects where you start like digging and like at the end of the day, the correct answer to solve this problem is just better policy, better legislation. And that like a startup concept doesn't address that. And so having this in the balance of the solution set that we're considering in order to try to address some maternal morbidity issues, I think I just appreciate this. Like I think it's very thoughtful and well structured. So. Okay, so then from a timeline standpoint, so applications are coming up due very quickly, July 31st. Fortunately, it's a very easy application. So if you go to the hackathon site, it's a couple of questions and would be really just your way of indicating what you're interested in and to help us to pair you with like-minded team members so that we can get you activated and set up. And so then from a pre-work standpoint, this is something where, to answer Nancy's question, you know, we'll be teaming you up, you get a chance to meet your team, and then as part of that, we'll be asking you to share your insights to the proposed problem that you'll be working on, so that you can understand the gaps in your understanding and start to build some research around that so you have a more complete picture as a team. And then one of the workshops and exercises that we'll be doing is learning how to write need statements, which if I were to teach nurses and medical innovators one skill, it's going to be to write need statements, because this becomes the North Star for any initiative that carries all the way through the entire process. And I think it's uniquely owned by nurses and medical innovators to write those need statements, and it shouldn't be owned by anybody else. So just flagging that as a skill set. So then, Rose, I think the times are incorrect here, but so it'd be 8:30 to 4 o'clock for the hackathon. But as some of the arc of this story will be diverging, so we're thinking more expansively, we'll converge back down to what we think are some of the best solutions. And then from a synthesis standpoint, you'll organize into what your pitch presentation will be. And then we'll have awards, we'll have valuable prizes at the end. And then on the activation side, what I'd love to work with some of the teams on is then building up a roadmap for if there's something here that you're excited about, that there's project plans. Rose, you mentioned funding sources and potential investors. I've been working on something for years now called the Midst Venture Studio, which is really trying to work with medical innovators in order to see their ideas pull forward. And that's something we can touch on down the road. But this is kind of something to kind of drop a little pin in that and kind of show that we really are interested in trying to help further this and take it all the way. So also wanted to just share a point of view on basically two different ways in which you can approach innovation. So there is a technology push approach, which is where really it's people coming in from outside of healthcare who have some kind of proprietary technology they're trying to push in this kind of bench to bedside approach, where it's a solution seeking a problem. And that is an approach, but what we really are trying to bring in is an empathy first approach, which is more market pull, where you start with a proprietary insight that comes from nurses, that comes from this community. And I think that insight is often discounted in its value, but I think is the core reason where something that's meaningful in healthcare can really be achieved. And so the framework here is going from bedside to bench, back to bedside, just to borrow framing from a friend of mine, Andy Kant, who posed that originally. So then I want to get into this this actually comes from two different dopamine pathways in your brain. You can't activate both at the same time. So there's the divergent thinking, which is where you are expansive. You're generating options, you're deferring judgment, you're seeking new and different novelty ideas. And the point of view you want to have, the mental space, is an open monitoring. And so I've found with me personally, being out and moving and walking or going for a run have been, for me personally, where some of my best ideas have come from a divergent framework. And so getting up and moving around, walking and talking is one of the best ways to have lots of ideas. And then from a convergent standpoint, this is where we're applying reason and judgment back to the wonderful mess of ideas we've come up with, to then filter and categorize and prioritize ideas down to what is the thing we should be doing next. And so this is a directed attention, this is a motivation pathway. I found that drinking coffee is one of the best ways to activate your convergent thinking, because it activates that dopamine pathway. So just understanding it's a whole brain approach, but understanding that at different points in time, I agree, coffee's good for all the things.
How could it not be?
Absolutely, right. But just kind of understanding that these are different parts of your mindset, and also different people come with different strengths. And so some of your most divergent thinkers need help to converge and organize, versus some of your most clear thinking convergent thinkers need help from the more divergent creative part to think of like the wild and crazy next adjacent. And it takes all strengths in order to really solve a unique problem that hasn't been solved yet. So in that discipline, you'll see I'll use this diamond shape when we talk about these different frameworks, which is really in this arc of the story. So within the empathy framework, we're asking what is desirable? What is the thing we want to achieve? Then there's different tools in this. So as you're posing the problem, Rose did a great job of scoping different problems within the maternal healthcare space. But then as we go through and do this, there's different frameworks and tools we can use, including journey mapping. So understanding kind of each of the stakeholders that are present at the time the problem happens, and be able to understand the journey that they go through on this. And that's a way of teasing out the need statements from each of the perspectives of everybody who's participating in that, which gets to the superpower I want to make sure we teach as part of this. And then from a creativity side standpoint, we're asking how might this occur? How might we be able to pull this off? And so we're opening ourselves up to lots of different fun and creative exercises for this, which I think is where, AI has been helpful here. But I also don't want to take away from the unique genius we all can participate in this, in coming up with novel solutions that really come from a place of empathy and understanding. And so that's something that we'll walk through as a team as part of this exercise. Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
and go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
No, I was just saying, and I mentioned this to you before, the empathy statement. That feels novel to me as we consider finding solutions, because so many great things come from the space of empathy, right? I love the definition that Brene Brown has for empathy is experiencing, being with people, like our ability to say, you know what, I haven't had this experience, but I can imagine this experience with you. So I love I love framing it around empathy. And again, it's different from the other hackathons that I've participated in. The word empathy never came up in anything that I saw. So I love that, that's a framework that you use, and a word and a belief that you really lean into, Ty, in the work that you do. So.
I think and thank you for that, but I think it's so important because when you go through, like, I live in the world of medical devices and the regulatory process we go through, and need statements are part of that. That's foundational to your design history file. But in order to write that, you remove all of the human context to it in a way that I just felt was so stifling when I was going through, like, learning it for the first time, and just not wanting to accept that. Like, introduced with some of my team, introduced the empathy statement to give traceability back to the human side of what we're trying to do, so that's something that doesn't get lost in the shuffle. Because when you start doing the spreadsheet exercise of writing out your need statements and failure modes and effects analysis, very easy to lose sight of what's important and most meaningful. So that's a major part of how we teach as part of the coursework. So I'm just going to I don't want to overwhelm everybody, but kind of level back out a bit in terms of how this fits into a system, which I really think there's a mix of design thinking at this earliest stage, of defining the need, empathy, health economics and market access from a value standpoint, creativity. And then when you get to something that is worth building out as a commercial enterprise, then you start going into a stage gate process of building the business case, going through and doing the development and testing, validation, and then launch, is really where you get to, like, actually seeing from a physical standpoint, what is the thing you envisioned actually making it into the market. But this is only half the story, because you step one more level back. And I think this is why nurses are so important to this, is level one, which we're talking about, is, problem, solution, fit, designing a product. And then if you have a physical good, then there's the manufacturing and regulatory, which is often where a lot of healthcare startups stop, because they think that just clearing the FDA is enough. But then when you get into actually getting it out into the market, getting people to actually, reach into their pocket and pay for the thing you designed, is one of the toughest tests. But ultimately, it's about user behavior change, which comes back to being centered in empathy is the only way I think you can actually achieve that user behavior change of patient adherence, of getting people to, we're used to doing things a certain way, and then to see positive change as a result of this very thoughtful process you've gone through, is, I think, one of the hardest things to make happen in this world. And I think is also where I think the standard of excellence is so high in order to be able to pull that off, which is why I think starting with empathy is the only way you're able to be successful at that, kind of that final stage. Anyway, just kind of a way of thinking about this. So, we've kind of talked about this from an empathy standpoint. And with the time that I have time to get into the Goose Innovator, which is a teaching framework I've been using. But the analogy is that, a goose is an animal designed by a committee. is that it can walk, it can swim, it can fly, but it can't do any of those things very well. But it's it's a versatile animal, which in some ways is that's the archetypal like founder, startup, kind of the person who wears 21 hats in order to get something off the ground. And I think, Rose, you and I both wear those 21 hats in our respective work. But I think it's also not something that's scalable. And so just as a mindset shift, there is so much potentially to learn when it comes to anything in healthcare innovation in terms of intellectual property, funding, clinical, reimbursement, regulatory, supply chain, engineering. There's so many, like you almost get overwhelmed thinking about everything you need to learn. So if you're asking the how question, you start falling into the goose trap. And many of us are smart enough to learn each of those. But it'll take us forever to learn it all. But if we're asking the who question of bringing together experts from different disciplines, then we can get to a much stronger result because we have a team of superstars coming together as opposed to trying to be a goose. So just framing that as a way of trying to avoid asking how and instead ask who as far as pulling together your team. And I really do believe that the user needs and needs prioritization is that unique leadership skill that I do want to teach and try to make sure is part of this process we're about to go through. If you think about all the different skills we need to learn, but needs prioritization is the thing that we need medical innovators to show up and offer that guidance and provide that North Star. And I'm just a firm believer in that. And so what you see run into this, particularly when you have the biomedical engineer that shows up at the hospital and starts asking the question of like, what are your needs? And from a clinical standpoint, if you haven't had the time to go through this process, then you throw something out there, but it doesn't capture the complexity of, in a sit down 1 hour interview. And so what gets received is, I didn't quite understand that. It's confusing, so I'm now going to filter down to something that matches my capabilities. And you end up with something that shows back up that's a mismatch as a result of this. So I think the way in which we're approaching this now is very short-sighted and is the wrong way to approach it. Oops, hold on, what happened? Give me 1 second, because I'm not sure what I did.
Well, while you're figuring that out, listen, I had like a whole moment there when you gave that last example, because I've lived that so many times, right? Having somebody come and ask you at an inopportune time, what do you need? And not being able to share with all the levels of complexity what's so the substantive need doesn't really get addressed, and then somebody comes in because they've interpreted it improperly because I haven't shared all the details I needed to share, and they're like, here, this is what we heard, here's a fix, and you're like, wait, what? this is what you got. So, oh my gosh, that resonates so much with me as a healthcare leader, so yeah.
It just anecdotally, I hear a lot about this where there's kind of a, shake the head and like, you really didn't have a nurse involved with this, did you?
That part.
Right, exactly. And I think this is the dynamic and really where we need that leadership and some of the skills that we want to bring to bear here. Okay, so getting back to traceability and what a good need statement is. So this is what the design history file process looks like in terms of this is what the FDA waterfall process. So up at the top here, we're describing user needs or need statements. And that becomes the foundation for your entire, product development process. You develop your inputs, you do your design process, you get to outputs, which is the requirements of the product itself, and the ultimate solution you arrive at. And then you do verification and validation back to your inputs and your user needs. This is the structured engineering system that we go through. The problem is that if the user need is posed incorrectly, that entire foundation falls apart.
Yeah.
Which is where that traceability back to empathy is really where I think the fundamental approach to healthcare product development and testing is flawed if you haven't gotten this part right. And so as part of this, getting to what is a clear need statement, this is something we'll teach in that process. We'll go through in the webinar that will be coming up. But ultimately, I like to describe writing a good need statement, going from the quote from Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching, of we mold the clay into a pot, but it is the emptiness inside that makes the vessel useful. With a need statement, we're describing what could be, and then the creativity and the solutions have to take the shape that is formed by the clay pot that we've sculpted together. So the work that we will do leading up to the hackathon is the shaping of the pot. What is, and clearly articulate, what does success look like before we pour in the creative energy of hot water? Because without that, the creativity of a hackathon can be just a mess. It's hot water everywhere on the table. But it is this work to shape the problem that creates something useful, and you can have a nice cup of tea and have some fun while you do that. So, okay, so good. I wanted to make sure we got to this slide. Rose, could you speak a little bit to, I guess, what expectations are?
Yes, I would love to. So the application, as Ty alluded to, is super simple. You know, we're just asking for your name, your email address, your phone, how we can connect with you, your job title. We were pretty intentional about that, wanting to have as diverse as possible. And are you associated with anyone, an organization, a university? And for you to choose your track. And then there's a couple of questions that we want you to answer to really help Ty and myself in the back end start to think and frame the work that we're going to do. So we're super excited that we can offer the winning team an award of $2,500 in cash and $2,500 in-kind support for a total of $5,000. So, and we ask everyone who completes an application to be sure to pay also. There's $50 to join the hackathon, but everyone who completes the process and delivers a pitch will get a $50 gift card. So in essence, this is absolutely free, or as my daughter loves to say, free 99. And we're going to have some really great swag, and we're going to have food, and you're going to meet such amazing people. It's just going to be a really great day. So there's no reason not to participate, because it's going to be really great.
So wonderful. And it's like there's no reason not to be here and part of this. So I definitely encourage everyone to come be part of it, come join a community. Rose, you're building something that's just exceptional here, and you get to be in at the ground floor when it just is going to be bigger and better and cheer you do this.
Absolutely. And again, how exciting is that? Thank you so much, Becca, for putting the link in the chat for everyone. It's super exciting. And I'd love if anybody has any questions, anything that we didn't address, or anyone wants to share an experience that they've had, whatever you'd like to share. Is that okay, Ty?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. If you have any questions, you can just come off mute and ask your questions. We'll give you a minute or two to do that, because, you know, even though we're not a big group, sometimes people are like, yikes, no, I don't want to talk about anything. But any questions? Anyone has any ahas about this process and just feel really clear now about what's going to happen on October 22nd in Atlanta, Georgia? All right. All right, well, you know how to get in touch with us, and we're super responsive if you have any questions. And we're going to make this recording available to the masses. You'll see it on all the social media platforms that we have, because I think this has been super helpful. And I hope you agree this has been a good use of your time and you have some clarity. So we're going to make it available to everyone, and take it from there. And that's a great question, Ty.
Yeah, so Sarah asked the question, can we come with a solution we're in the early stages of building to refine it, or just a problem to solve? Um, I think one of the challenges of this is that and this was one of the questions that you're asked on the forum of without revealing potential solutions, describe the problem you hope to address with the project. Um, you almost can't pose a problem without coming up with a solution. And the best way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. And so, absolutely come in with your solution, but I would suggest that you be open to modifying the solution as part of this, because I think the joy of this is to deepen your understanding, to like try to make it so that the solution that you do have is something that's much stronger for going through this process. And so I think that's anybody who's doing anything early stage. The early stage for the couplet care bassinet was a sidecar that I thought was going to be a really simple, low complexity project. And then it turned into something that, in order to perfectly solve all of the different problems we encountered in the different environments, was something that continuously updated and changed. So I think that's part of being a good innovator, is being open to adapting your solution as your model for what the problems truly are updates. So I would just encourage you to have some openness there.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's a great way to frame that. Becca, I think that's your question is perfect. You said, just to clarify, if you want to participate, are you committing to creating a business to fix the problem or just helping to create some solutions? Yeah, I think would scare everyone off if we were like, you mean you don't want to create a business? That is not our objective at all to, get folks to create businesses. We really want to solve for the problem. And I think the example that Ty just gave about how it started, with couplet care and how it actually ended. So we want the focus to be, I really want to solve this, and then come together so that we can do the mind meld and the discussions and the creative sharing, and then we hone that solution a little bit better, and then we through the needs statement process hone it even more, and then it becomes something that we can definitely move forward with. So no business formation right now, just what is the solution, and who knows, maybe your solution leads itself to an amazing business that you love and you're having great impact, but that's not our objective now.
Absolutely. I 110% agree with that. I mean, there's actually very few ideas that make for, or like solutions that make for viable businesses in any market. So I think it is almost better that it's not a business, because it is something that can change the standard of care, that can be disseminated as better practice. That is like an easier way to make the change happen. And it's really, if there's no better way to do this, then okay, fine, we'll have to do a business. But we want to make sure that the foundations for that are set with good intellectual property practices, and making sure that you continue to have a stake in the outcome with that if that emerges. But it's definitely not the overriding mission or purpose here.
So we're close to the.
Yeah,
it was such a great question. Great questions altogether. We're coming close to the top of the hour, and I know everybody's super busy and probably have another meeting that's coming up really quickly, so we want to be respectful of your time. I do want to say thank you so very much for prioritizing this and getting some information. Again, the recording is going to be available really soon, and we're going to disseminate it broadly. And the question wasn't asked here, but I just want to say, if somebody should miss the July 31st deadline, it's okay. We're humans and we're flexible. So if the application comes a little later, we try to create a timeline that would make sense, so you can have at least 2 solid months of meeting with your team and doing the important work. However, if your application is later, all applications will be considered, because we just want you to be part of the process, and we want to hold space for you. So don't be limited by that and say, I don't know if I can if I can get myself together in my heart, mind, and soul to move forward with this by July 31st. Don't let that be a limitation.
Wonderful.
What final words do you want to share?
I think it takes a bit of courage in order to go and do an event like this, to come and meet new people, to do a new adventure. And I just want to encourage people that, it takes courage to go out and solve some of these problems. And we would like to invite you, if that's important to you, that you come be part of that. And we also want to make it so that we're respecting that time that you're putting into this, that we're going to show up with our best that we can do, so that the problems we're looking at are too important not to bring our best to.
Right.
And we just want to, just out of appreciation for everybody that's contemplating doing this.
Right. That's exactly right. All right. Well, with that, y'all, I'm going to say thank you again for being here. And if you don't mind, those of you who are here and those of you who are listening, feel free to forward the link to the recording to the people that you know, or the people that you'd like to prod and say, listen, I have heard some of our conversations and you have some really great ideas. Do you want to consider this? So please share it broadly, because we really want a nice pool of participants, because we have this amazing resource in Ty and his company. So we really want it to be hugely successful, and because the birthing community deserves better, we want it to be successful. So please share it. If you want to say, I want to do one really great thing for Rose Horton, that's what Rose Horton wants. She wants you to share this broadly. And and I can't wait to see everybody on October 22nd, because it's going to be amazing. So thank you so much. I hope everyone has a really great day, and I'll be seeing you soon. Thank you, Becca, for being such a wonderful